I was doing a video on campaign stuff for Starfleet Battles, and I diverged into Playaids for a moment, so I separated that out of the video, and I'm going to make a separate video with this. One of the things I came across when I was doing that was an old website for John Kim on the Internet Archive. His website used to be darkshire.org/john-kim/public_html/SFB/aids.html. Now, if you type that address into the Internet Archive Wayback Machine, you'll get this site. And a lot of the links here are dead, but some of them are still retrievable. So it used to have things regarding rules, charts, ships, tourneys, maps, tables of contents, rules, checklists, etc. Now, I've gone through a few of these. Some of them are retrievable. This, for instance, is a range to damage table. So it'll give you a rough idea statistically what a weapon will do at certain ranges. This is a tactical intelligence sheet. So certain ships at certain ranges and under get to know certain pieces of information. That information will change as the range changes. So outside of range 30, you don't know if it's a D7 or a D7L or a D7S, that sort of thing. But once you're within a certain range, you get to know the specific hull type. You get to know warp power available. Once you get really close, like under range 4, you get to know the arming status of non-capacitor weapons. So you get to know what the arming status of a Hellbore is, or a plasma torpedo. This is a rules checklist. So if you just print this out as a piece of paper and you're playing with a group for the first time, you want to know what rules are being used and which rules are not being used. You can just put a little check mark beside them or a little X kind of thing. There's even a little Starfleet Battles helper program that used to run on Windows 95. So I guess if you get some sort of an emulator for your tablet, you could still run this on a tablet. There was also a GIF for an energy allocation form. It's an older style form. And there was a cloak chart. This is actually a very useful chart. It takes the rolls to retain or regain lock-on. It does the math formulas for you at specific ranges at certain speeds. The range from the ship that's trying to retain lock-on to the cloak ship and the speed of the cloak ship. And it does the formula calculation for you and just gives you what the die roll would be. It also has a fired at cloaked ships shifting and what the reduction of damage is. Lists events that void cloak and restrictions that a ship that's under cloak is under. So it's a fairly useful GIF. These are just some of the things that were found on the Wayback Machine Internet Archive. A lot of the Starfleet Battles websites are no longer available, and you will only find them on the Internet Archive. So the Wayback Machine, if you're a Starfleet Battles player, is a interesting place to troll, to try and find interesting pieces of information that used to be available but no longer is. And then we had an article here for speeding up the game. So One of the major time-consuming factors in Starfleet battles is deciding how to move. There are some things that can speed up this process. The largest factor is, of course, having a battle plan. Once you know what kind of attack pattern you're going to use, then your movement is performed to achieve it. There are, of course, always modifications to your overall battle plan. In essence, you make a battle plan for each turn, still trying to keep to the overall plan. Once you reach a certain level of efficiency, you can begin predicting your opponent's battle plans or maneuvers. Instead of deciding your movement on a hex-by-hex basis, try to think in terms of general patterns of movement. In order to do this, you must realize what effect side slips have on movement and how quickly your weapons are brought into arc or brought back into arc. Constantly side slipping to one side and turning in the other direction will bring your weapons, for instance FA, photon torpedoes or FA disruptors, back into arc more quickly if your opponent is doing straight turns. You'll also turn the ship in what at first might appear to be a tighter circle than just traveling in straight lines, turns, traveling straight until the turn mode is completed and turning again. That's what a straight line turn is. What it actually does is shift the center of the circle over a couple of hexes to the left if you constantly side slip left and then turn to the right. So here is a Fed doing straight turns, and here is a Gorn doing slips to the left and turning back into the right. So as you can see, if they had both started going in this direction, it simply shifts the Gorn to the left. Now if you alternate your side slips, full one direction turn, slip to the opposite, etc., until you come back to your start point, will move the ship in an overall tight triangular path. So here's an example of the ISC doing that. So right here, we'll start here, the ISC turns, slips, goes forward, slips, turns again, slips, goes forward, slips, turns, slips, goes forward, slips, turns, slips, forward, slip, turn, slip, forward, slip, turn, slip, forward, slip. And the overall pattern is a triangular movement. Then we have fishtailing. Fishtailing is used to reduce the number of hexes you travel forward in a certain direction. In effect, it slows you down without actually going at a slower speed. Move, slip one direction, complete the slip mode, do not turn, slip back in the other direction, and repeat over and over. For every fishtail, you essentially do not travel one hex forward. For instance, you travel 5 hexes, but only move 4 from your start position. So right here, this Romulan has moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whereas if you count directly from the start and end positions, it's only 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's what a fishtail is. Zinties, or drone users, even plasma players, will do this a bit to either allow plasmas or drones to catch up and pass them so that they can stay behind them, kind of thing. And we have some examples of overlays of these types of movements. Just the act of constantly slipping to one side before turn on a turn mode of 5 will bring an FA arc back to bear 2 hex rows sooner. So here we have a combined graphic showing 3 different types of movements. So we have the Zinti that just goes straight and then turns. We have a Romulan here that fishtails and turns, and it only fishtails once. That's 7 movements. Over here we have 7 movements again, but it fishtails in 2 different directions. And then we have a Gorn over here that just slips over to the right, or sorry, slips over to the left, and then I've overimposed them. So here we see the Gorn just simply slipping to the left, and this is the FA, this line indicates the FA arc, brings that arc to bear 3 hex rows sooner. Not sooner in the number of movements, but sooner in placement on the map. So as you can see, the fishtail is not as good as simply slipping, but it is better than just straight turns. So the Gorn here on the right hand side, that's the slipping. The Romulan here did the fishtails, and the Zinti did the straight turns. Now the only other movement effect is this straight line side slip. Because the map is a hex map, side slipping allows you to travel in a 30-degree turn angle instead of the 60-degree turn that a hex normally would let you do. In essence, it allows you to turn without turning, or at least change the geometry of your approach. So here is an example of the angles. So you've got your straight line over to the right. That's achieved by just simply slipping to the right. You've got your straight movement. And you're slipping to the left. And you get your turn straight up. So each one of these segments is about 30 degrees. So from here to here 30, here to here 30 to 60, from here to here 60 to 90. So from this direction over, so straight up here, that's a 90-degree angle. So once you realize these patterns of movement, you can apply them to the appropriate situations. If you see your opponent doing a fishtail turn, you know that with the same turn mode, you can cut inside him using a simple slip turn. You can even use this information to travel at a higher speed and keep a similar turn mode if your opponent isn't using that info. Then we have maintaining distance. If not trying to match your opponent's moves, you're often trying to use the most effective movement to stay away or get away from seeking weapons. If your opponent is moving his seeking weapons in an intercept pattern, then slipping, keeping the weapon on your flank, will effectively close the distance by 1 hex every time you slip. It's better to turn and run if you need the distance. And here's an example of it graphically. So if the Saurian is simply slipping, he's actually closing the distance with the drones. Whereas if he simply turns and flies parallel to the drones, he's keeping that distance open. If you're in a corner on a fixed map and the seeking weapons are intercepting you on the way out of the corner, then attempt to turn back into the corner and out the other side, or even HET. By not slipping along with you, the drones or the plasma, he's in a way letting you gain more distance from the seekers if you do this. This depends on the separating distance and on whether or not the weapons are almost parallel with you. This is obviously more useful with plasma, where the few extra impulses you buy may mean a big difference in damage, although at a cost of positioning yourself at a disadvantage or burning your HET. So basically, plasma torpedoes weaken with distance that they travel. Where an S torpedo starts at 30, it degrades to 22 points of damage at about 11 hexes, and then degrades further the further it travels. Now, if you can't visualize these patterns, you could draw them out on a paper hex grid like I've done for you here in that graphic. Above all, know what ranges you are willing to fire your weapons at. I've seen players agonize over firing at range 13 or 15 hexes when the range bracket is the same for their weapons and the movement didn't make too much difference on firing arcs or the shield hit. If you're going to fire range 9 to 15 in turn, it's better to do it at range 15 unless you want to close for later, or unless you're waiting to try and get a specific shield. don't wait until range 12 or 13 or 14 unless it's a matter of firing arc or shield. If it is a matter of arc, keep in mind your opponent's speed and turn mode. If they can't turn for a few hexes and they're not near a split shield situation, will it really matter if you fire some weapons now and some after you turn? Especially if your turning keeps you from closing? One of the more difficult things to learn how to do is determine when to launch drones, and to a greater extent plasmas, so that they hit the target. In a floating map, mid-turn speed change game, this is even more difficult. The first thing to determine is the amount of damage you're willing to accept from your opponent and out of your weapons if you're using plasma. The only advice I can give is practice makes perfect, and launch as close as possible, and as soon after a turn by your opponent as possible. Remember that the first movement of a seeking weapon must be directly forward or an HET. So be very careful which direction you point your weapons on launch if you are close to the enemy. Now, some of the other things that I used to do was create useful little play aids, and this is one of them. It's a declaration of action sheet. Basically, that's where you write down what you're doing. So you'd write down what ship it is, if you're a seeking weapon race, what type of seeking weapons you're launching, their target, if you're firing heavy weapons. For instance, in this case, an example is a plasma player. They're bolting their plasma torpedo tube number C, or letter C, at the target. Firing phasers, what the phaser numbers are, the target, and other actions. Tractor beam, 3 points. They're trying to tractor or eagle 2. The turn it happens, and the impulse, etc., etc. This is a convenient way of keeping track of what's happened. So on turn 3, if you need to know when you fired phaser 5 and 6, if you fired them within the last 8 impulses, you can just look, see, oh, there's where 5 and 6 were fired, there's the turn, there's the impulse. Now, one of the things I used to do for Starfleet Battles Online is I would make alternate counter sets. In version 2 and version 3 of the game for a while, you were allowed to use your own counter sets. And then all of a sudden Steve Cole got really uppity for some reason and decided to only allow the official counters. But anyway, this is what the counters would look like. Down here, these are the originals. Basically a scan of the cardboard counters. This is a cartoon set I made, which were a little bit easier to see than the cardboard counters. And then I made a model set. And here's a little bit more of an example of the model set. So there was a standard collection, and there were some alternates. So there was a generic ship for a freighter, and there was 3 types of freighters you could choose. This is actually what a Fasagorn used to look like, but I thought it would look good for a Wind ship. They're Wind Ox freighters, instead of just using the freighter model. And then you had the, I forget the name of them, Micro Machines, I think they were. Micro Machine miniatures for Star Trek TNG. They're Klingons and the Romulans. Some Cardassians, Frax, Paladine. And you could even use some Battlestar Galactica stuff. Some of the other styles of Federation ships. And then Gorn Battleship, Gorn Dreadnought, Gorn Heavy Battle Cruiser, Gorn CCH, Gorn Destroyers, War Destroyers, Frigates, Tholian, Jem'Hadar, Romulan, ISC, etc. just some of the things I had created for Starfleet Battles. So as I was saying, the Wayback Machine Internet Archive can be useful if you're looking for old Starfleet Battle stuff. One of the things you're going to need is the original address. So I know, for instance, this is quick setup conditions that's no longer there. But just because it's not coming up on the immediate link doesn't mean it's completely missing. You just go back to the front page of the Internet Archive, put in what the address would be, in this case it was a top cities website address. Do the search on the actual address instead of just relying on the link, and up it comes. There's actually going to be different points in time where a snapshot was taken. So the link on the John Kim page was probably linking to one of these blank sections here where there was no snapshot, and that's why it didn't get the website. But if you actually try and do a search for the actual address, it'll show you some snapshots sometimes, and you'll get lucky and you'll find it. Let's see. Nope, didn't find it. So it's hit or miss. Sometimes you can find something, sometimes you don't. Now, one of the places that you can find a lot of these old sites is in the Starfleet Battles web ring. Now, the current web ring may not have a lot in it, but if you can find an old site, let's see. SFBnexus.com, I believe, used to be a big site. This used to be where Ted Giebel would have his art. There we go, StarfleetNexus.com. There are various snapshots up here, so let's pick an earlier day. There we go. And here's the web ring. So if we click on List Sites, we get a similar page listing to the current one. So as I was saying, we had a success here, and it's listing more options than what was on the current site. So it had some of the older websites listed. So there's Mike West's page. We can copy the link address, paste it, make sure we remove the Internet Archive part from the front of it, and then do a search for it. Sometimes we'll get lucky, sometimes we won't. But as you notice on the current one, you didn't have that additional listing down here. So let's try the NANS page. And this time we found a page in the archive. So we have a DOS SFB tool. Now, a lot of times the content in the links won't be there. It's hit or miss. You can try. It really does help to have an address to start with. Now, one of the problems with the old websites is the color schemes that were often in use. So there were some links here on the side we almost missed. But Mike West's page was one we were trying to find. Let's see what happens if we try the link. And we finally get to Mike West's website. He used to do a lot of early year ships. Instead of listing it, you can just try the next site link on WebRing. Sometimes you'll get something, sometimes you won't. If you like the video, like it, share it. If you feel up to it, you can donate through PayPal. But have fun playing Starfleet Battles.